Okay, so as all of you, many of you know, I'm sure that we launched a new feature in 12.8 for that will be that was focused on Docker expiration tag expiration policies. So it basically leveraged the existing container registry API that we have, the bulk delete API, to allow users in a user interface to fill in which images they'd like to keep using regex, when they would like to run deletion, like what schedule they'd like to run deletion, and how many images they would like to keep. So we launched this feature only for new projects, assuming that there was this performance issues with that bulk delete API, and we didn't want to overwhelm the system or crash anyone's self-managed instance. So we only rolled it out for new projects. The flip side of that is we got some feedback right away from the community that they want support for this for all projects. And I was talking to those the community and saying, well, we have these concerns. And so this conversation is a follow-up to that to say, what has to be true for us to roll this feature out to all projects? What are some of the concerns that we have, and how can we help address those concerns? So I had some items added to the agenda, and I think, Steve, you had the first, okay, so the thing that I brought up was, is it possible to turn this on for all existing projects, and can we think about self-managed instances versus GitLab.com separately? And I think, Steve, you had the first kind of comments in the doc.
Yeah, and so I was kind of just starting to comment from like what kind of things can we possibly do here in terms of turning it on from my perspective, which is just from the like, how can we turn this on for some people, but it doesn't necessarily solve the problem of overloading the system. And so from the non-overloading the system standpoint, for self-managed instances, we could add a configuration option, something in the admin options maybe, for just being able to turn it on and off at the admin instance level. However, that's probably something that we don't necessarily want to do until we know what happens if someone does turn it on and they do have a lot of tags that are going to be cleaned up right away. And then for GitLab.com, from the standpoint of turning it on, really there's just some validations in place that we need to remove in order to allow these projects to run it. But we do need to first address the concern about performance. So I wasn't really offering any solutions there, just some insight into that one particular side of what has to be done.
Is it possible to so it's only for new projects? I'm not 100% sure the mechanism by which we determine that, but is it possible to ease that back and say, like, projects that are a year old, 2 years, like, is there a way to like gradually do it so that we don't overwhelm the system?
We could conceivably do something based on time. Right now, the way it's set up is all new projects, when they're created, they automatically, like a database record for a container expiration policy is also created associated to that project. And so pretty much we're saying, if a project doesn't have a container expiration policy, then we don't allow them to create one. Like it's only if it's created automatically when the project is created that we allow it to happen. So we could add some additional rules there that would restrict based on time, not just based on whether or not it's brand new.
Yeah, and time is just an example. I mean, some way to introduce this in a phased kind of way. Just if the thing we are truly worried about is that everyone's going to use it at once, and that's just too much load for.
And I think one of the concerns is just if someone turns it on a project that has a large amount of tags, regardless of age. So, for example, if we turned it on GitLab, there's a very large number of repositories with a very large number of tags. And if someone turned it on and said, keep 100, then that would probably break things. So one of the questions that I have, which I think is question number 1, is what is involved in cleaning up the bulk cleanup process, which is calling that Docker API endpoint for deleting tags. There's 2 sides of it. There's one, we're calling that endpoint, which is maybe known to be slow. And then there's 2, when we call it, we're finding all of the tags we want to delete and then calling it for each tag one at a time, rather than making a single request for all tags. So I don't know if there's different approaches we can look at to help with that, but that's something I was kind of curious about.
Yeah, so basically right now there is a difference between deleting a tag from the API or the front end, or deleting a tag asynchronous, which is the one that I believe we're talking here. So that's different. In 12.9, we have introduced a performance improvement for the tag delete, both for the API and the UI. And that has moved from 4 to 5 requests to delete one tag into just a single request to delete a tag. So that's much less effort on the network and on the systems to delete a tag. But the improvement was not applied to the asynchronous deletion. The asynchronous deletion continues to use the old way of deleting tags. So if we are dealing with a lot of loads because of this feature, maybe it's worth to roll out the improvement to the asynchronous delete as well.
Is there any reason we can't roll it out to the async version? Like, is there something that we would have to change in order for that to happen?
Yeah, we have to change a class, but it's definitely possible. We only changed the API and the front end because that was what was being asked on the issue, and we also wanted to do a controlled rollout of the new feature in case there was something going wrong with the new delete. At least the asynchronous part would work as expected. But now that the new feature is live for more than a week and everything is okay, we can probably roll that to the asynchronous deletes as well. So that's one of the follow-up things that I've noted on the merge request for the delete improvement. I can probably post the link here.
Do you think that if we implement that, like, does that one change to solve this problem, where we could just say, like, we are confident we could turn it on, or do we want to fix other aspects as well of the
so that will only work if the container registry being used is the GitLab container registry. So that will only work for sure for gitlab.com, because in the other places we are not sure what registry people are using, if the GitLab container registry or a third-party one. So even with the performance improvements, if people are using a third-party container registry, GitLab will default to the old behavior, which is the slow delete. Okay, so even that wouldn't be like a silver bullet. It would just be a little bit more help to ensure that we don't hit any performance constraints.
A question: why for older project we don't invert the policy and we say, instead of retain 100, like delete 10? Executed once every second day or something like that, so that we can slowly chip away until it becomes to a manageable way that then you can run it normally. So like we can use the policy to slowly attack the very old stuff in a controlled way, so that we don't flood any server, we don't destroy any hard drive. And then when it goes under a certain amount, then you can start using the normal and delete everything -1. Would that make sense performance-wise, or it just doesn't work like this?
I think that's possible. But I think the key here is probably to figure out an algorithm to let us roll out this progressively to more and more projects and make it available to more and more projects, like every day or at least every week. Every week we could unlock the feature for projects that are older than a week before the release happened, and we can continue to do that for several months, for example. Because yeah, if we turn this on for a lot of projects, we may have problems.
But
I'm not sure what. Yeah.
Sorry, can it be that one project still generate a problem? Say the CNG project on GitLab.com that has all our Docker container, right? Can it be that one project generate issue?
It depends on the load. I'm not sure on the limitations on the async queues. I believe it's Sidekick that we are using for GitLab. And of course, it also depends on the number of instances of the container registry that will be under load under those circumstances. So to be honest, I don't think we will be able to answer that with a high degree of certainty before we actually try and expose that feature to more projects.
Because, sorry, Ellie, go on.
Since this is an async job anyway, is it possible to put these tags into a common queue? And then, whenever the job is run, like we have a maximum limit that we know is acceptable, and that will produce an acceptable amount of load, and just chip away at the queue. Because I think this addresses the problem of, well, what if there's one repository that's going to delete 10,000 tags at once? This might resolve that. I think an issue with this is that GitLab.com, somebody might, I could see users complaining that it's like, well, I clicked delete, a week ago, and it's still not done, because it would take some time, at least for the initial run.
So I think I missed. You're saying using a queue system. So you mean a queue for each individual run, or because like I'm thinking if you have like someone that runs a 10,000 cleanup and then someone that runs a 5, but it gets queued after the 10,000, then that the person that's just trying to delete the 5 tags, it never seems to happen.
Yeah, that is the so not necessarily a queuing by I'm requesting these many tags, but queuing all the tags in the request, if that makes sense. So like each tag is queued up regardless of the project. But yeah, that does have the limitation of like if it could be a while, especially for an initial job on a big instance like GitLab.com, before it moves. It can be seen as being not effective and not doing the thing, rather than just waiting.
I think another way would be to apply throttling on the queue. So even if someone requests the deletion of 1,000 tags, we could, for example, define that the queue will not dispatch more than 100 deletes per minute or per hour, let's say. So requests would just queue up on the queue, and they will be served on a constant pace, like in bursts. At least that would be a controlled approach. We would always have an expected behavior because the load would always be the same. I'm looking at the issues and the merge requests in GitLab, and there seems to have been a change 3 years ago to allow Sidekick jobs to be throttled. I'm just sharing the link. I'm going to post it on the document as well. So maybe we could attempt something like this.
Yeah, definitely throttling sounds like a good idea.
But maybe we can directly limit the algorithm output, right? Instead of on the queue, we can say if the algorithm is spelled out that we need to delete, the policy says we need to delete the 10,000 tag, instead it's going to be 100, right? 101, they will go back to 100. And we can like document this for the user directly on the UI and say, we don't delete more than 100 at once, and then it will take a while before the retention policy does its job.
I think that makes sense. So I'm just thinking about this from the technical standpoint then, versus what we already have. So let's say like somebody did have, 1,000 tags. So it's going to take 10 runs. Would the idea be that if we're running it once a day, maybe that if they say, I actually want to run it once a week, I think like the tricky part is like if they only want to run it once a week, but that first time it's going to take 10 times to run through it, like being able to tell it to run for 10 days in a row and then suddenly switch to, well, you know, only running once a week can maybe be tricky. At least I don't see how that's easy to do.
The other option instead of throttling the queue would be throttling the service that is processing the requests, like saying you can only execute like 5 times per day or 10 times per day, and at most you can be executing like for 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and whenever that deadline is reached, we just stop deleting whatever is left to be deleted, and we will continue on the next execution. So that may be an alternative, but the idea is basically the same. It's the difference is where we are going to throttle on the application or on the queue.
What about anything like failing gracefully, like when you encounter an error and not just, you know, getting stuck and running consistently? Like that might be another thing worth considering, because I think we've seen sometimes the process fails, like when we just changed this in the garbage collection process where the corrupted manifest would cause errors. Would we need any special error handling for the delete process to consider?
I think the main concern is not actually the errors deleting something. It's likely because since the container registry is shared for other services as well, so listing tags, people that are pushing images either through the CLI or CI. So if the registry is under a really heavy load, it may stop processing those requests or take too much time, and eventually a timeout will trigger. And we will start impacting other functionalities beyond the deletion of tags under the expiration policy. So I think it is worth to apply a limit to this to make sure that everything else is not affected.
So far we've been talking about separating out potentially GitLab.com and self-managed. And Joam, you had some concerns about that because it's possible self-managed is using external registries. Can we move forward even and just like say that that's okay and just make a note that this won't work for external registries? Like if you're using ECS, it won't work. This only works if you're using the GitLab container registry.
You mean the expiration policy feature?
Yeah.
So limiting that to our container registry.
Yeah, and self-managed for all projects if we did it.
I think that may be excessive because the functionality, the required functionality is there. The only difference is that if they are using the GitLab container registry, the actual deletion will be fast. But people that don't use the GitLab container registry should also be able to use it because the underlying functionality exists. So they are still able to delete tags using an old workaround, which is slower. Okay, we can possibly just add a note saying, if you're not using the GitLab container registry, your deletion process will be around 80% slower. So maybe that will also convince people to move to our container registry at some point. But I think just blocking that and not making it available to self-managed instances or those not using our GitLab container registry is maybe a bit excessive. I would prefer limiting the throttling than actually limiting the functionality.
Okay, so we could enable that. Well, the other change we were talking about is the asynchronous updates, and that required just changing something that we've already done and applying those changes. Once we do that, can we then focus on enabling this for self-managed instances? Does anything else have to happen on our end to make that work? Or are there any other concerns preventing us from doing that?
We can apply the fast tag delete to the asynchronous jobs whenever we want. They'll only work for instances powered by the GitLab container registry. That's the only limitation. I've refrained from doing that because the problem was on the UI. It's not an issue if a delete takes half a second more if it is an asynchronous job. But now we are talking about a lot of load and a lot of deletes happening asynchronously. So yeah, performance will matter as well. So yeah, we should apply that as well. I would prefer to do that once we have a decision around the long-term compatibility plan with third-party registries, so that we don't end up having more and more workarounds on top of workarounds to maintain compatibility with other registries. But if this is a concern now, we have to do it.
Okay, I don't want to talk so much, but I do want, we have 8 minutes left, so I'm wondering, are we zeroing in on a solution or idea, or is there more work that we have to do to think through? Like, what are there questions that we haven't asked yet?
It sounds to me like there's sort of like two aspects which we kind of hit on, which is one, turning on the change that's already made for the async version, which solves GitLab.com and anyone using our container registry, and then implementing some sort of throttling to handle all other instances of this. But it sounds like for safety, we need the throttling before we turn on the other version, because if we turn it on, then anyone that's not using our container registry might have problems. So it sounds like there's like the two steps are implement some sort of a throttling and then update the async to use the fix that's already in place. So the next step would be like, figuring out how the throttling would work, which is a little bit, we can probably continue that discussion in an issue on a more technical level. But I'm guessing that sounds like the path, unless anyone has any other thoughts.
Yeah. Throttling is mandatory. The performance improvement is a nice to have, basically. I think it's worth to look at the merge request that I linked on the documents about the throttling for sidekick jobs. Maybe we can leverage on that to do the throttling without changing the code, which would be nice.
But there is something that we need to do short term, and we were discussing this with Steve today. So the expiration policy is it's available for new projects, right? But it's not turned on by default. So if a new project is born in 12.8, they go for 3 months, they pile up 1 million tag, it becomes the same problem as an old project with maybe 1 million tag accumulated over 3 years. So we should start to think that maybe we should have the expiration policy turned on by default with some sensible default, and to have this on the short term. Like, this is something that we can do rather quickly, and it will patch up future problems.
From the design perspective, I think it would be, sorry, I don't mean to jump in, but I think it would be really great if we did have that default on situation for all new projects, just because that would guarantee we don't end up in a situation where there's already so many images and tags that it's difficult to deal with. And also follows along with GitLab's overall product theme of like on by default. So if we can move forward to that direction, that would be, from a UX perspective, it would be the preference, because that's kind of the ideal scenario we want our users to go down.
I think it would be good to give a heads up to the infrastructure team, saying we have a feature here, we are going to turn it on. Can everyone please keep an eye on statistics and metrics to make sure that we are not overloading the system. And in case something odd is spot, we can act and either disable the feature or spin more resources to handle that load.
Yeah. I'm wondering if we do turn it on, I feel like we'd want to like let users know that suddenly any project that has a container registry or a container expiration policy is going to suddenly start having tags deleted. Like, we won't turn it on. I suppose anything that up to this point that already is like currently turned off, we shouldn't turn on. We shouldn't just like turn it on users that are unsuspecting. But if a user creates a new project and pushes up tags, they should at some point have some sort of message on the front end or somewhere that says, you are using the container registry. By default, things are going to be deleted regularly, just so people know.
I think
that is already,
yeah.
That is already a warning for auto DevOps. Whenever you create a project, you see a warning saying auto DevOps has been enabled in case you don't want it, just configure it by yourself by creating a GitLab CI file. Maybe we can have something like that saying automatic expiration policy has been set up. If you don't want it, go ahead and turn it off or adjust the settings.
One thing that we could do immediately is to display on the container registry alert that says the next policy is going to run at this time. At the moment, we already have this info already in the API, so we can just pull it on the front end. And then we can have some nice to have and saying like X amount of tags are going to be expired, or this tag is going to be expired, maybe it's not, but we can already say expiration policy is on and it's going to run in a week, and go check your settings and a nice link to the settings.
I think it'll be good as long as we get started where we kind of make it obvious that the feature is now enabled. And then as we train our users that this is like the default of what we expect our users to be, we can start lightening up afterwards. And we can do that during the rollout of that expiration policy as well. There's quite a few areas in GitLab where we kind of display like, hey, this feature's on, just so you know. And our users are pretty used to seeing that and making adjustments therein, where like if they didn't intend for their retention policies to be enabled, they can go and fix it then. We can make it pretty obvious.
A show of hands, a 1 being as little confidence as possible and the 5 being maximally confident. How confident are you all that we could solve this problem and turn it on for all new projects with the plan that we've been talking about?
You mean in a certain time span or just in general?
In general, and let's say maybe, and then that's a great follow-up question. I would be curious the level of effort too, but yeah. I see a lot of 4s.
I think confidence in doing this is high. Time, that's a different story.
But the good thing is that we can divide this in steps, right? We can enable the feature flag, the expiration policy for everybody with sensible default and alert. Then we can have throttling, and then we can have like performance update on the async, possibly also in parallel. So there is a path forward, right?
So it sounds like there's 4 issues to open. There's 2 front-end issues. One is to display when the next policy is going to run. Another one is saying that enabling it by default and saying that this is enabled by default. Then there's the throttling issue, which maybe we'll luck out, and we already can control that with that existing MR Joam sent. And then there is the issue of turning it on for all existing projects, first for self-managed and then for GitLab.com. Okay.
And the performance improvements for the async delete probably as well.
Okay.
So yeah, it looks like we can work on some of this in parallel. Like the first one should definitely be the warning, both on the container registry page, showing when the next one is going to run, and also the warning for new projects. Then enable it and work, but before that we need to work on the throttling. That's mandatory. Then we can enable it and optionally improve the performance of the async fleet.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be really good if we can do the throttling outside of the registry, because this enables this fix to work with non-GitLab container registries. Otherwise, it's more difficult.
So Joam and Haley, can you open the throttling issue and the change for rolling out the asynchronous deletes? And then Nico and Ian, can you open the issues for the front end? And then Steve, do you have any issues you could use the existing issue that we have that's rollout support for all projects?
Yeah, we can use that issue, and then I'm sure I'll be involved in the throttling issue too.
Yeah, the throttling definitely needs to happen on the Rails side.
Yeah. How about I can open the throttling one since it's the Rails side of things.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Thanks, everyone. It was hard to see all that feedback in the issue of people saying that they were mad that this didn't cover, but at the same time, It's nice to see that people really want this feature and that, you know, they're anxious to have it in their hands. So it's cool to see, and hopefully we can get this out and in their hands soon. And I'm going to stop recording.